What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Sean Baker's new film, Anora, which I saw a few days ago at a press screening here in New York, but I've had a little trouble getting started on this video because the movie's not coming out in the US until October 18th. But if I wait any longer, I worry that my very positive memories about the movie will start to fade. So we're just going to let her rip and not to worry. I won't give away any spoilers since the movie doesn't come out for a few more weeks. In any event, if you haven't heard, Anora won the Palme d'Or at this year's Cannes Film Festival. Other recent winners include Anatomy of a Fall, Triangle of Sadness, Titan, and Parasite. Not a bad crop of movies, but I think Anora has a real shot at being one of those rare art house movies that can kind of break out and become a real international commercial success. Because this is not the kind of art house cinema that only appeals to joyless prudes and intellectuals. This movie is an absolute blast to watch, and it has this kind of like contagious, propulsive sense of forward momentum that is very tough to resist. But also, it's just fucking hilarious. I found myself cracking up throughout the movie, but also at times it's very sad, it's very tender, it's very moving, and I think best of all, a huge chunk of the story unfolds inside of a New York strip club called Headquarters, aka HQ, to the dancers that work there. And because this is a Sean Baker movie, he gives us the real thing. This is not some Disney-fied bullshit that we see in so many shows and movies. The movie's incredibly authentic, and best of all, a massive turn-on. And if you're familiar with Baker's earlier movies, you'll know that this is not Sean Baker's first barbecue when it comes to exploring the lives of people who either work in the adult entertainment industry or as sex workers. This movie, Starlet, Tangerine, and Red Rocket all did a brilliant job on this front. And I haven't seen his film, The Florida Project, but I think that's much more of like a suburban drama about people living in the shadow of Disney World down in Orlando. But it must be said that The Florida Project was one of Sean Baker's bigger successes, grossing $11.3 million off of a budget of $2 million. But I suspect, I have a feeling, Anora is about to blow the doors off of Sean Baker's earlier record, and it could become the movie that he's best known for moving forward. So what is the story, you might be asking? Well, first and foremost, watch the Red Band trailer. I think the Red Band trailer perfectly captures the tone and the style and just the essence of the movie, but here's the brief synopsis from Wikipedia. Annie is a young Uzbek-American stripper from Brighton Beach, a Russophone enclave in New York City. As she is somewhat conversant in Russian, her boss fixes her up with Russian-speaking clients. After meeting Ivan, the son of a Russian oligarch, a romance kindles that, in addition to his desire to avoid deportation, leads to their elopement. Their fairy tale marriage is threatened when Vanya's parents travel to New York intending to force an annulment. And if that sounds a little bit like a fairy tale rom-com, it very well could have been if the movie had been made by a filmmaker like Gary Marshall, who directed Pretty Woman back in 1990. But this movie is much more raw, much more intense. And Sean Baker, he doesn't prettify the story. He doesn't make it sparkle. This is a movie that will make you feel like you've been out on a proper bender consisting exclusively of champagne and cocaine by the end. You're going to feel a little bit limp from the intensity of the experience, but it's an experience that you won't soon forget, thanks to actress Mikey Madison, an actress whose life I suspect is about to change dramatically in terms of which part she gets offered moving forward. She's absolutely extraordinary in the movie, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if she gets a lot of attention at the various award shows early next year. I first saw her 5 years ago in Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where she made quite the impression as one of the psychotic hippies in the Manson family.
What the fuck?
And in another life, she might have had a great career as a scream queen. And who knows, maybe she'll do some horror movies in the future. But she has got some serious lungs. And speaking of screams, there's a scene in this movie where her screams become so deliriously intense that I thought like the entire movie just might get ripped in two. I mean, it's fucking hysterical. And it made me feel like I was going completely insane, but in a good way. But you'll just have to see it to know what I'm talking about. As far as her co-star goes, his name is Mark Alexandrovich Edelstein. I don't speak Russian at all. He's a Russian actor, so forgive me for my complete lack of pronunciation. But his part might be considered a little bit more one-dimensional. He's basically just like this spoiled party boy who gets wasted and plays video games and screws every waking moment of his life, all while flying around on private jets. That said, he's charming and funny up to the point where you start to realize that apart from his parents' vast wealth, he doesn't really have a lot of personality, doesn't really bring a lot to the table. And in one of the funniest lines of the movie, his guardian in America sums up his life in one sentence, which I will not spoil here. But speaking of his guardian, Karen Karagulian, once again, forgive the mispronunciation, but Karen Karagulian kind of steals the show. He's a Sean Baker regular. People will remember him as the cabbie from Tangerine, as well as the porn producer in Starlet. But in this movie, he basically plays a fixer working for these powerful Russian oligarchs, and it's his job to undo the damage, undo the whirlwind romance before it gets out of hand. But watching him in action, It's funny as hell, especially when he releases his Russian goons, leading us to Igor, played by Yuro Borisov. He's another Dark Horse candidate for one of the best characters in the movie, with many of the most quotable lines. And once again, I won't spoil them here, but after the movie, there's this one film freak in attendance who is enthusiastically comparing this movie to the films of Preston Sturges, specifically The Palm Beach Story. And I don't completely buy the comparison because the tone and the style of the comedy, they're so different. However, like Preston Sturges, Sean Baker likes to use a really deep bench of character actors, and he's also totally unafraid to give some of the most memorable lines to some of the smaller roles in the story. I feel like with most movies, if they're lucky, they have one or two good lines in the movie total, so of course those are going to go to the star, but in a movie that is overflowing with great lines, well then you can give them to a character like Igor. Also, he is just a total savage, as you'll see when another Russian makes the mistake of kind of getting in his face at one point deeper into the movie. But let's get down to business. What makes this movie so electric is the unflinching portrayal of the life of a dancer in a strip club. And I'm not ashamed to admit, I have burned a little cash at several of these establishments around New York. And on a few lucky occasions, I was joined by some ladies who were curious and wanted to have the kind of the VIP lounge experience. But there's a reason why there are so many of these clubs in New York, because they're fucking fun. When you combine neon lighting, beautiful girls, overpriced booze, and wild pop tunes like Tattoos, All the Things She Said, your evening is going to be one to remember. And Sean Baker knows how to shoot these scenes like somebody who has enthusiastically been there, done that, and bought the t-shirt. And speaking of buying the t-shirt, I picked up one memento at a club down in Charleston, South Carolina called the Southern Belle. Like I said, I am not afraid to spend a little money in these establishments. But what's different about Sean Baker's approach versus some of his peers, and what makes his style so appealing to me, is that he wants his audience to have a good time. He wants to give him a thrill ride. He's not one of those directors that you see on platforms like HBO or Amazon Prime, where the only nudity you see is a man's cold, tiny, shriveled up little flaccid penis. For me, that's the very corporate version of being naughty these days, and it just sucks. Sean Baker knows that some viewers want the cinematic equivalent of snorting a line of coke off the butt cheeks of someone named Crystal or Diamond, real characters from the movie, by the way. And in my opinion, a filmmaker can't fake this kind of vibe or energy. You can always tell the difference between a filmmaker who's done a little partying versus a filmmaker who's done none. Like when you watch a Federico Fellini movie like La Dolce Vita or 8½, you know he did some wild hell raising in the late 50s and early 60s in Rome when he was at the absolute peak of his fame and stardom. Sean Baker shoots these scenes in a way where you can tell he's done a little partying. Like when he gives us a scene where people are going to the dock to get an IV so they can recover from their hangover faster, so they can start boozing again. Like I've only been around people who've done that one time. I was out in Aspen, Colorado for a bachelor party, and some people were going to the dock to get IVs. I was like, that is gross. Like, I don't like needles. I don't want to get in there. Like, look, trust me, if you get the IV, you can start drinking again immediately. Whereas like I'll still like curled up in a ball, like, fucking dying and so on and so forth. And I think what it boils down to is that Sean Baker shoots these scenes with a real conviction, unlike so many other filmmakers who are clearly terrified by sin or vice, or even worse, have like a judgmental attitude towards sin and vice. And by the way, this movie introduced me to an amazing new term which I'd never heard before, and they say it in Russian, so I'm not quite sure what the translation is, but in English, evening butterfly. And I think I'll be using that term from now on instead of dancer. Evening butterfly just has a much more romantic ring to it. But long story short, I think sex and eroticism might finally be making a little bit of a comeback in the movies after almost being completely absent for the last decade. Because the recent movie The Substance, as well as this new movie Anora, they're both giving me some cause for hope on this front. But as far as some of my criticisms go, I don't really have anything major to offer, apart from the fact that some people are going to find this movie to be a little taxing and or exhausting, because the second half of the movie is this kind of relentlessly combative adversarial experience. And it leans into a very similar format from the movie Tangerine, where you have characters angrily searching through every nook and cranny of a big city, trying to find somebody. And by the end of it, you will feel like you've been up all night, just like the characters. And it can absolutely wear out the audience when for like an hour straight you hear people just like, screaming and shrieking and talking shit. Luckily for me, I found it all to be very humorous, so I was able to kind of just like, ride the whirlwind. But it wouldn't be surprising to me if some people are like, that movie was a little on the long side, but yeah, apart from perhaps having a little bit of a length problem, yeah, this movie is just an absolute joy to watch. And without specifying why, I suspect some people will find the ending to be a little frustrating or quite different from what they were anticipating or hoping for. But I found the ending to actually be pretty grounded and pretty satisfying. It feels very organic relative to the rest of the movie. So, like I said before, it's not a Gary Marshall movie. You're not gonna get like the Julia Roberts experience. But if what you want It's a very gritty, authentic, like New York movie. And I've done a lot of shorts on this channel about my favorite movies shot in New York. Here we have yet another movie taking you for a walk on the wild side through the streets of New York. And yeah, I'll definitely be seeing this movie again for a second time when it finally comes to theaters on October 18th. Because even if some of the film's contagious energy kind of plays itself out by the end, I still felt this massive rush of adrenaline throughout the movie, just pure glee. And so many filmmakers these days, they seem to be completely terrified to take one of those proverbial walks on the wild side, or worse, they kind of wag their finger in disapproval at some of the antics they might be hired to portray on the screen. Because, I mean, this is just the sad truth. There are a lot of buzzkills working in the world of film and television these days, and I do my best to avoid their work like the plague. So if, like me, you're ready for some high-octane cinema with the kind of the classy veneer of art house credibility, definitely take Anora for a spin. And if you're chomping at the bit and ready to rock, well then check out some of Sean Baker's earlier movies, because I've seen Tangerine, I've seen Starlet, and I've seen Red Rocket, and I've also seen some of his early Greg the Bunny shorts. I'm not quite sure like how early he was involved with Greg the Bunny, because Greg the Bunny went through several iterations. Initially, it was like these little skits on the IFC channel where they would introduce movies, and then it got turned into kind of like a cheesy Fox sitcom, and then it went back to IFC. But the version of Greg the Bunny I like is like the early days where they're making these shorts for like $5, where Greg would be like introduce a movie like Scanners, and those shorts were just so goddamn funny.
Welcome to Greg's Eye on Sci-Fi. Here on the Independent Film Channel, we have got one daily of a sci-fi film for you, David Cronenberg's Scanners. And you got to realize now, this is the original Scanners, okay? This is not Scanners 2, The New Order. This is not Scanner Cop. This is David Cronenberg's original.
And also, I should add, if you are a diehard movie freak or a diehard cinephile where you live for the Criterion Collection and things like that, Sean Baker is one of us. Go over to his Twitter profile or his X profile and just check out his feed. He's always like retweeting great podcasts about old movies and that sort of thing. He even retweeted one of the episodes for Wrong Reel, my podcast, at one point. So I was like, all right, thank you, Sean. You didn't have to do that, but you were nice to do so. But he's a genuine, sincere movie lover. And I always feel like, I shouldn't say that great movies are only made by movie lovers, but it certainly fucking helps. Like if you are a movie lover where like watching movies is like a drug, and you're like, please, like give me more heroin, those people know how to provide the experiences that fellow film lovers are craving. And so whether you're talking about Martin Scorsese or Quentin Tarantino or Peter Bogdanovich or Francois Truffaut or Jean-Luc Godard, like film history is filled with like the great cinephile directors who just through their love of movies are compelled to start making movies on their own, and Sean Baker definitely strikes me as one of the filmmakers in that mold. So on that note, I'm going to wrap up this video. Definitely check out the flick. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. I look forward to hearing what everybody has to say about the movie on October 18th, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.